Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So just like Mr. Hoppy here, and yes, that is now officially the name of the frog in the picture you see here, you might be a bit skeptical about this episode. A commander deck that is less than $2? Is this some sort of a joke? Well, I'm here to tell you right now, it is no joke. In fact, this deck is $1.56, so even 44 cents less than advertised here. But how can a deck with such an incredibly low budget be possible? Well, let me tell you, with the right commander and the right motivation, it is most definitely possible. So, who is this commander and what exactly does this deck want to do? Well, let's jump into it to find out. And the commander for this deck is Joyra of the Gitu. That's right, Joyra is not only a fantastic commander on a budget, but a budget card now herself thanks to her reprinting and TSR. And actually, I'm not sure why exactly I said the abbreviated version. Time Spell Remastered, regardless. Thanks to that reprinting, this Joyra is now only 23 cents. And while she does make up a very large portion of that $1.56 budget, it's a very small budget, come on. If a deck under $2 isn't affordable, I don't know what is. But what I do know is that Joyra of the Gitu is a fantastic commander for a budget like this one. She's a 2/2 human wizard for 1 blue-red. She has pay 2, exile a non-land card from your hand, put 4 time counters on the exiled card. If it doesn't have suspend, it gains suspend. Suspend means at the beginning of your upkeep, remove a time counter from that card. When the last is removed, you cast it without paying its mana cost. If it's a creature, it has haste. Essentially, Joyra allows you to put a small 2 mana investment on a card to cast it later for free. So, Joyra is pretty unique in that she is basically unlike any other commander that can feasibly be built on a budget as small as this one. With a budget this small, obviously we don't have access to efficient ramp spells or, many ramp spells at all. So other commanders are going to have to make do with a lower mana curve to make things work, which is okay, but Joyra says, who cares about mana curve? Because again, with Joyra's help, by investing in a card and casting it later, every single card in your deck essentially just costs 2 mana. So you can have a mana curve of like 6, even on a budget like this, which is absolutely absurd. When you're working on a budget this small, you're mostly looking for a 2-color commander that can utilize cards that are incredibly cheap very effectively. Mostly you want a 2-color commander because you have to heavily lean on basic lands, yet you still want enough cards to pick from. So a monocolor deck might not give you access to enough cards, and a 3-color deck might just have too many things that are too difficult to cast. So again, Joyra is a 2-color commander that can utilize spells in an effective way that you otherwise wouldn't be able to utilize at this budget. And believe me, there are plenty of high converted mana spells out there that Joyra can utilize that just cost pennies. I mean, and actually to be more specific, there are plenty of ones out there that just cost a penny each. So the goal for this deck obviously is to get Joyra out and then start suspending as many cards as we can. So what exactly are those cards? Well, let's jump into it to find out. First up, we've got some high converted mana cost creatures that can help us deal with our opponent's things like Aircult Elemental, Spellweaver Duo, and Archipelagore. Aircult Elemental is a 2/5 with flying and whirlwind. When it enters the battlefield, return to 1 other target creature to its owner's hand. And then Spellweaver Duo is a 4/4 that can bounce a tapped creature back to its owner's hand. And then Archipelagore is a 7/7, and actually if we choose to mutate it, it's going to tap down a creature, and that creature does it untap during its controller's next untapped step. Next up, we've got some big bounce spells with Swirling Torrent, Floodwaters, and Run Ashore. Swirling Torrent says choose 1 or both, put target creature on top of its owner's library, and return target creature to its owner's hand. Floodwaters has cycling for 2, and it can also bounce 2 target creatures back to their owner's hand. And then Run Ashore says choose one or both. The owner of target non-land permanent puts on top or bottom of their library and return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. But we can deal with even more things with Captivating Gyre. It says return up to 3 target creatures to their owner's hands. And then Sea God Scorn is slightly more flexible, bouncing 3 target creatures and or enchantments to their owner's hands. Next up, Bond of Passion lets us threaten a creature and deal 2 damage to any other target. But now let's move on to the golden pick of this deck, which is the number 1 card out of our 99. And the golden pick of this deck is Confiscate. Confiscate is a very simple magic card. It's an enchantment aura for 4 blue, and it says enchant permanent, you control enchanted permanent. Confiscate might very well be a 2-cent card, but it can help us steal absolutely anything on the board. And the card that we're going to steal very well might be a $100 card that can help us win the game. So yeah, this little 2-cent card can provide us a lot of value, and that's what makes it the golden pig. Regardless, next up we've got some other ways to throw a wrench into our opponent's plans with Earth Cult Elemental, Meteor Golem, and Blood Feud. Earth Cult Elemental is a 6/6, and when it enters the battlefield, we roll a d20. If we hit a 1 to 9, each player sacrifices a permanent, a 10 to 19 is each opponent sacrifices a permanent, and a 20 is each opponent sacrifices 2 permanents. And then Meteor Golem is a 3/3 and has an ETB that's going to destroy target non-land permanent in opponent controls. Next up though, we've got Blood Feud, which can take out 2 creatures if used properly. It says target creature fights another target creature. So yeah, this has the potential to take out some of the best creatures on the board. But we're nowhere near done with throwing a wrench into our opponent's plans just yet. First up, there's Prophetic Titan, which has when it enters the battlefield, choose 1, but there are 4 more card types among cards in our graveyard. We choose both instead. It's going to deal 4 damage to any target, and or we look at the top 4 cards of our library and put one of them into our hand, the rest of the bottom of our library in a random order. So this can ping a creature, or a planeswalker, or even a player's face, and we also get some card advantage out of it. Next up, there's called Oath of Flame Fiend, which has when it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice an artifact. If you do, deals 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of targets. So if we're able to sacrifice that artifact, we can dish out damage as we see fit. Another way to dish out damage, but not as we see fit, but in a different way, is Cinderheart Giant. It's a 7/6 giant berserker with trample that has, when it dies, it deals 7 damage to a creature an opponent controls chosen at random. So yeah, if this gets taken out, chances are an opponent's creature is most definitely getting taken out too. And then we've got some straight up burn spells with Magmatic Sinkhole, Fiery Fall, and Inferno Jet. Magmatic Sinkhole actually has Delve, and it's going to deal 5 damage to target creature or player. And then Fiery Fall is going to deal 5 damage to target creature, and it's got basic land cycling for 1 in a red if we need to go get a land. And speaking of a flexible card, there's Inferno Jet, which has cycling for 2, and it's going to deal 6 damage to target opponent. And speaking of 6 damage, next up there's Spreading Flames, which can deal 6 damage divided as we choose among any number of target creatures. And then for even more damage, there's Cinderstorm, which is going to deal 7 damage to target creature or player. But we also have a burn spell that can help us out in multiple ways with Explosive Welcome. It's going to deal 5 damage to any target, 3 damage to any other target, and we add red, red, red. So we can dish out that damage as we see fit, and we also get some free mana out of this. And speaking of getting mana out of a card, how about Creative Outburst and Elemental Masterpiece? Each have pay is it, discard them, create a treasure token. Again, there really aren't many ways to ramp on a budget this small, so even temporary ramp like these can really help us out. And actually, again, these cards are pretty fantastic in this deck because if we don't need that ramp, well, these are still some fantastic spells for us to suspend. Creative Outburst is going to deal 5 damage to any target. Then we look at the top 5 cards of our library. One of them goes into our hand, the rest go on the bottom of our library in a random order. And then Elemental Masterpiece gives us 2/4/4 tokens. And finally, the ramp options that we did have for this deck within this budget are Meteorite, Seer's Lantern, and Milliken, so we're going to be utilizing those. Meteorite has, when it enters the battlefield, deals 2 damage to target creature or player, and it can tap to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. And then Seer's Lantern can tap for a color, so we can pay 2 and tap it to scry 1. Milliken is our lone mana dork, tapping to mill a card and add a colorless. But next up, let's talk about some cards that can really help us dig deeper into our deck. So first up, we've got Snow Day, which is going to tap up to 2 target creatures, and those creatures don't untap during their controller's next untap step, and we draw 2 cards and discard 1 card. Next up, there's Roiling Waters, which is going to bounce 2 target creatures back to their owner's hand, and we draw 2 cards. And then Read the Tides lets us choose 1. We can draw 3 cards or bounce 2 target creatures back to their owner's hands. Moving on, we've got Scour the Laboratory, which has Delirium. It's going to cost 2 less to cast if there are 4 more card types among cards in our graveyard, and it's going to let us draw 3 cards. And speaking of 3, there's Mental Journey, which is going to let us draw 3 cards, and it's got basic land cycling for 1 and a blue. Next up, there's Prying Eyes, which will have us draw 4 cards, but then we discard 2. And speaking of drawing 4 cards, we've got Opportunity, which just says target player draws 4 cards. Up next, there's Interpret the Signs, which says scry 3, then reveal the top card of your library, draw cards equal to that card's converted mana cost. Again, this deck has an average converted mana cost of, around 6 mana, so yeah, we can hit some really big things on the top and draw a ton of cards with this. Up next, we've got Horizon Scholar, which is a 4/4 flyer, and when it enters the battlefield, we scry 2. And speaking of scrying too, we also have a 5/5 Prophet of the Peak that does the exact same thing. Next up, there's City Watch Sphinx, which is a 5/4 flyer, and when it dies, we surveil too. And that surveilling can be even more effective in combination with something like Revolutionist. It's a 3/3 human wizard, and when it enters the battlefield, we return an instant or sorcery card from our graveyard back to our hand. But actually, we can get even more cards into our graveyard with something like Book Devourer. It's a 4/5 trampler that has, when it deals combat damage to a player, you may discard all the cards in your hand if you do draw that many cards. So this has the potential to wheel multiple times. But we can also work to refill part of our hand though with Lore Seeker's Stone. It has pay 3 and tap it, draw 3 cards. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each card in your hand. And then Ingenuity Engine provides us value in a different way. It's a 7 mana artifact that has Cascade. On top of that, by paying 1 and tapping it to sacrifice an artifact, we bounce target artifact we control back to its owner's hand. Up next, we've got some cyclers with Lava Serpent, Sanctuary Smasher, and Chartooth Cougar. Lava Serpent is a 5/5 with haste and cycling for 2. Sanctuary Smasher has first strike and it's a 6/4, and when we cycle it, we put a first strike counter on target creature we control, and Chartooth Cougar has mountain cycling for 2. But we're not quite done talking about the creatures that we want to get out just yet. So now let's move on to Invading Manticore and Accomplished Automaton. Invading Manticore is a 4/5, and when it enters the battlefield, we amass 2, so basically we get an army and it gets 2 counters on it. And then Accomplished Automaton is a 5/4 Fabricate for 1, so we can either get a servo or we can get a ++1 counter on this. Next up, we've got some ways to pump our team with Bone Pit Brute and Doomscar Titan. Bone Pit Brute is a 4/5 with Menace, and when it enters the battlefield, target creature gets +4/+0 until end of turn. And then when Doomscar Titan enters the battlefield, creatures we control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. So this can be very effective getting multiple creatures out on the same turn with this. And some very effective creatures to get out with this are ones that have some form of evasion, such as flying. Mahamadi Djinn is a 5/6 flyer, Riverwheel Aerialist is a 4/5 flyer with prowess, and Wavewing Elemental is a 3/4 flyer that has landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, it's going to get +2/+2 until end of turn. So again, with flyers like these, we can generally get some damage through on at least one opponent. So we're going to be running even more flyers like Orascale Guardian, a 4/4 flying and haste dragon that costs 1 less cast for each land card in our graveyard. And the Volcanic Dragon has those exact same stats, being a 4/4 flying and haste dragon. And then Wingfold Terran is a 3/6 dinosaur, and when it enters the battlefield, it comes in with a choice of either a flying counter or a hexproof counter on it. So depending on the situation that we're in, we can choose one or the other. And then next up, we've got Scrap Diver Serpent, a 5/5 serpent that can't be blocked as long as the defending player controls an artifact. So chances are really high that this is going to be unblockable on at least one player. And then Ripscale Predator is a 6/5 dinosaur with menace, so that's going to be harder to block for opponents too. And then Gargadon might not have any evasion, but it still can get damage through because it's a 7/5 with trample. And actually, you might be wondering why I chose the alternative art sketch version of this, and actually it's because, for whatever reason, this version is cheaper at 1 cent instead of the regular 2 cents, so there you go. And then finally, we've got Magma Hellion, Razorfield Thresher, and Slipstream Serpent. Magma Hellion is a 5/4 trample and haste, Razorfield Thresher is a 6/4, and Slipstream Serpent is a 6/6 that can't attack unless the defending player controls an island, and when we control no islands, we sacrifice it. Again, since we're running so many basic islands in this deck, chances are incredibly unlikely that that's going to happen. Regardless, now that we've talked about every single non-land card in this deck, let's move on to the price. And like I said at the very start of this episode, not only is this deck less than $2, it is 44 cents less than $2 at $1.56. Now keep in mind that this cost does not include the cost of basic lands, but if you already have those, congratulations, you've got some cost savings there. And also, this does not include the cost of heavily played or damaged cards on TCG players, so you very well might be able to save even more. Though do keep in mind that this cost also does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. Regardless, at the end of the day, this is an incredibly budget-friendly deck. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.